Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Aliens called the human zookeeper weak. Until the cursed wolf chose him as its master. Nolan Varick had handled everything the galactic menagerie could throw at him, from towering plant beasts to venomous rock crawlers, but the task they gave him today was unlike any before. He was to groom Syrah, the queen beast of Vexia, known across the galaxy for her lethal temperament and her scales encrusted with a particularly infectious fungus. Cairo was the last creature anyone would dare approach. Her recent confinement had worsened her condition, and her infection had spread, leaving her irritable and suffering. As Nolan prepared his grooming kit, his colleagues looked on with a mix of awe and pity. Kyra's prior handlers had quit or been hospitalized. Some said that even approaching her was akin to a death sentence, but Nolan felt a tug of curiosity and empathy, a desire to help a creature many had given up on. With steady hands, he loaded up a pack of specialized tools and salves, determined to treat the beast with the care no one else dared offer. "Ready for the fight of your life?" his friend and fellow zookeeper, Jerk, asked, half joking, half worried. Nolan managed to grin. "More than ready. She deserves the chance to be herself, not just the creature everyone's afraid of." And with that, he stepped into the containment corridor, feeling the weight of the impossible task ahead. The energy barrier separating him from Kyra hummed, and as he looked through it, he saw the massive, dark-scaled creature lying on the ground, her golden eyes narrowed and tracking his every movement. The energy barrier deactivated with a low hum, and the dense, earthy scent of Kyra's enclosure washed over Nolan. He could feel her gaze locked on him, her golden eyes glowed with both warning and pain. She stood at twice his height, her 6 powerful legs ending in talon-like claws, and her scales shimmered with a sickly green hue from the infection. A low growl rumbled from her throat, a sound that made every instinct in Nolan's body scream to back away. "Easy, Kyra," he murmured, keeping his tone calm and steady. "I'm here to help you." Slowly, he moved forward, carefully avoiding eye contact, knowing that any perceived challenge could trigger her ferocity. As he reached her side, he unpacked a small vial of a healing salve, specifically formulated to combat her infection. The formula was potent, and he hoped it would soothe her long enough for him to continue. Kyra's growl softened slightly as he gently applied the salve to her scales, but her body remained tense. Nolan maintained a soothing stream of conversation, explaining his actions with each careful touch. "This will take some time, girl. I need you to trust me a little longer." To his surprise, she remained still, tolerating his presence in a way he had not anticipated. It was only when he dared to reach closer to a particularly infected area that she let out a sudden snarl, her massive head swinging dangerously close to his. Nolan froze, meeting her eyes with a steady calm. "I know it hurts," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "But if you let me, I can make it better." For a tense moment, she held his gaze, the powerful muscles in her neck taut and ready to strike, but then, as if understanding his words, she eased back her eyes, softening just enough for him to continue. With careful movements, he resumed applying the salve, working faster now that she'd given him this rare opportunity. When he finally stepped back, Kyra let out a deep exhale, a sound that echoed through the enclosure like a sigh of relief. Nolan felt a thrill of hope. He had taken the first step in an impossible task, and somehow he'd earned a sliver of the Queen Beast's trust. Over the next few days, Nolan returned to Kyra's enclosure, gradually building their routine. Each session began with him speaking softly to her, keeping his tone low and calm. At first, she responded with growls, her golden eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, but Nolan noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. As he continued treating her, her growls softened and her tense posture relaxed ever so slightly when he was near. Nolan tailored each grooming session to address her worst infection sites. Her scales, once gleaming and dark, had lost their luster, marred by the fungal patches that spread across her body. He applied the healing salve with a gentle touch, always mindful of her reaction, making sure to pull back if she showed the slightest sign of discomfort. One day, As he applied the salve near a particularly inflamed area along her spine, Kyra did something remarkable. Instead of flinching or growling, she lowered her massive head and leaned into his touch, her usually fierce gaze softening. Nolan paused, hardly daring to breathe, as she allowed this moment of closeness. "There we go, girl," he murmured, a warm smile spreading across his face. "We're getting somewhere, aren't we?" he encouraged, as he continued the grooming session, marveling at the quiet understanding that seemed to grow between them. His once impossible task had begun to feel less daunting, as if Syrah were finally accepting his presence, allowing him to be her ally rather than her adversary. By the end of the week, Nolan noticed a marked improvement in Kyra's condition. The infection had started to recede, revealing the dark, gleaming scales beneath. She moved with less pain, her steps more fluid, and her once aggressive growls had softened to deep, contented rumbles. Their interactions became almost routine. Nolan would enter, greet her with a few calm words, and begin his work, while Kyra allowed his gentle care without resistance. News of his progress spread through the menagerie, sparking a mixture of admiration and disbelief among his colleagues. Kyra was known as the Queen Beast for a reason. Her reputation for ferocity was legendary, and the fact that she allowed Nolan to touch her, let alone groom her, was something beyond anyone's expectation. Some came to watch, peering from a safe distance to witness the human zookeeper working with the most feared creature in the galaxy. During one particularly quiet session, as Nolan worked near her face, Kara surprised him yet again. She leaned her head down toward him, nudging his shoulder with surprising gentleness. Startled but touched, Nolan reached out and placed a hand on her scaled snout, feeling the warmth of her breath as she rumbled softly. "There's a good girl," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're starting to trust me, aren't you?" The connection between them deepened with each session. It was as though she could sense his unwavering dedication, his refusal to give up on her, and she responded with a respect that matched his own. She allowed him to work on even the most sensitive areas, and soon her scales began to regain their natural luster. It was clear that Kyra, the feared queen beast, had accepted him into her world. For Nolan, these moments held a quiet magic. He had earned the trust of a creature most would never dare to approach, a bond forged through patience, understanding, and mutual respect. With each passing day, his admiration for her grew, and he felt certain that her trust in him was just as strong. As Kyra's health continued to improve, so did her strength and vitality. The infection that had once weakened her had nearly vanished, leaving her fiercer and more alert than ever. Nolan could see her fiery spirit returning with every visit, her golden eyes sharp, her movements fluid. She no longer seemed like a creature in pain, but rather the true queen beast of Vexia. However, this newfound vitality brought new challenges. Syrah was not a typical animal, and as her strength returned, so did her natural aggression. One afternoon, as Nolan was grooming a particularly stubborn patch near her tail, she suddenly whipped around, her massive tail knocking him back. Nolan stumbled, catching himself just in time to avoid her claws, which had instinctively swiped at the disturbance. The enclosure staff gasped, frozen in horror, as Kyra snarled, her gaze narrowing as she observed him. But instead of reacting with fear, Nolan raised his hands calmly, his voice steady as he spoke to her. "Easy, Kyra, I know it's uncomfortable. I won't hurt you." For a tense moment, they stared at each other. The queen beast's snarls gradually softened into low growls, her posture shifting from aggressive to almost curious, as if considering his reaction. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, she settled back down, allowing Nolan to continue his work. His heart still racing, Nolan resumed the grooming session with renewed caution, aware that he was dealing with a creature whose instincts were as sharp as her claws. Yet the incident also strengthened his resolve. Kyra's swat hadn't been a true attack, it was a warning, a reminder of her power, yet she had chosen to let him stay. It was a delicate line they walked, one that required every ounce of patience and respect. After that tense encounter, Syrah's trust in Nolan seemed to deepen. She began to greet him with a low rumbled sound that, to an untrained ear, might have seemed menacing, but no one recognized it as a welcoming gesture. Each session became a carefully choreographed dance, with Nolan intuiting her moods, watching her body language, and adjusting his approach accordingly. Their growing bond didn't go unnoticed. The menagerie staff watched in awe, unable to comprehend the connection between the zookeeper and the queen beast. It became routine for onlookers to gather behind the protective glass, whispering as they watched Nolan work with Kyra, brushing her scales and speaking softly to her. One evening, as he was finishing a particularly lengthy grooming session, Syra surprised him yet again. After he applied the final coat of healing balm to her scales, she lowered her head, nudging his shoulder with a gentleness that belied her massive strength. Nolan placed a hand on her head, his fingers brushing over the sleek scales that had once been covered in infection. "There you go, Kyra," he murmured. "You're back to your full glory." In response, Kara let out a deep, resonant purr, a sound that filled the enclosure and reverberated through the viewing area. The staff and visitors outside watched in stunned silence, witnessing the impossible, the feared queen beast displaying affection for his human. But the moment was interrupted by a sudden, blaring alarm. A power fluctuation had disrupted the menagerie's containment fields, and the gates to Kyra's enclosure began to flicker. As chaos erupted and staff scrambled to secure the area, the queen beast didn't move. Instead, she stayed close to Nolan, shielding him with her massive form. Without a word, Nolan placed his hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward a safe corner of the enclosure. As the security systems rebooted, his calm demeanor soothed her, and she followed his lead, her eyes focused on him rather than the commotion around them. When the alarms finally ceased and the gates were restored, Kyo released a low protective growl, positioning herself between Nolan and the entrance, as if daring anyone to disrupt their moment. Her loyalty was clear, she had chosen him as her trusted companion, her unlikely protector. And as Nolan met her gaze, he knew their bond had surpassed the realm of mere trust. They were a team, a partnership forged in the delicate dance of patience, courage, and respect. The queen beast had found a kindred spirit, and Nolan in turn had found a friend in the most ferocious creature in the galaxy. With each passing day, the bond between Nolan and Kyra grew stronger, and the menagerie had taken notice. Staff members now approached Nolan with a mix of admiration and disbelief, marveling at his ability to handle a creature that had once been untouchable. However, not everyone was pleased with the growing connection between the zookeeper and the queen beast. A group of influential patrons who sponsored the menagerie were concerned that Nolan's methods had softened them too much. The queen beast was a symbol of power and ferocity, a creature meant to inspire awe and fear, not companionship. One patron in particular, Lord Farron, had been vocal about his dissatisfaction. Known for his ruthless view of animal management, he believed that Kyra's newfound calm was a weakness, one that undermined her position as the menagerie's prized attraction. One evening, after Nolan had finished a late grooming session with Kyra, he was approached by Lord Farron and his entourage. Farron's gaze was cold, his voice edged with contempt. "You've turned our queen beast into a docile creature, she's meant to be feared, not pampered." Nolan stood his ground, meeting Farron's gaze. "Kyra is not an object to be feared or exploited, she's a living being, and her strength doesn't come from aggression alone, it comes from her intelligence and resilience." Farron's eyes narrowed. "If you're not careful, she'll lose that edge, and if she does, I'll make sure both of you are removed from this menagerie." Despite the threat, Nolan refused to back down. He had earned Kyra's trust, and he wasn't about to let anyone jeopardize the bond they had built. Yet, as he walked back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that Farron's words were more than idle threats, he would need to remain vigilant. 2 nights later, Nolan was awakened by the blare of alarms echoing through the menagerie. He bolted upright, his heart racing as he processed the flashing lights and urgent voices over the intercom. "Emergency in Sector 4, Queen Beast's enclosure compromised." Without a second thought, Nolan rushed toward Kyra's enclosure. When he arrived, he found the gate wide open, its locks overridden. Inside, CYO was pacing in confusion, her scales bristling and her growls filling the air. Guards and staff members stood nearby watching with both fear and hesitation, unsure of how to handle the situation. Nolan immediately understood what was happening. Farron's words echoed in his mind. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately unlocked Kyra's enclosure, hoping to provoke her into aggression to justify removing her and, likely, Nolan as well. Acting on instinct, Nolan stepped through the open gate, calling out to Kyra in a calm, steady voice. "Kyra, it's okay, I'm here." The queen beast paused, her gaze snapped to him, her body tensing as if ready to defend herself. But as Nolan continued to approach, she relaxed, recognizing the one person she trusted. He raised a hand, signaling the guards to hold their fire. "She is not a threat," he said firmly, his voice carrying a note of authority that left no room for argument. "Lower your weapons." With the guards standing down, Nolan moved closer to Kyra, reaching out to place a reassuring hand on her snout. Her growls softened, and she lowered her head, allowing him to guide her back into her enclosure without resistance. The onlookers stared in awe as Nolan closed the gate behind them, his touch enough to calm the beast that no one else dared to approach. The tension in the room broke as the menagerie's director arrived, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "What happened here?" she demanded, her gaze shifting between the open gate and the stunned guards. Nolan met her eyes, his voice steady. "This was no accident. Someone unlocked the gate intentionally. I believe it was an attempt to force Kyra into a dangerous situation." The director's face hardened as she glanced at the gathered patrons, her gaze lingering on Lord Farron, who stood at the back with a look of barely concealed frustration. "I'll conduct a full investigation," she said firmly, leaving no doubt that she would pursue the truth. As the crowd dispersed, Nolan stayed by Kyra's side, his hand resting gently on her scales. She looked at him with an expression that spoke volumes: trust, gratitude, and perhaps even affection. Nolan realized that their bond had transcended anything he could have anticipated. They were allies, bound by loyalty and an understanding that few others could ever comprehend. That night, as he sat beside her in the quiet of her enclosure, Nolan made a silent promise: no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would stand by Kyra's side, protecting her from anyone who sought to exploit her, and in return, he knew she would protect him, her human friend who had dared to see past her ferocity to the soul beneath. Together, they were unbreakable, a team forged in trust and resilience. After the attempted sabotage, the menagerie's director launched a thorough investigation, and rumors spread that Lord Farron's influence was finally under scrutiny. Though Nolan was relieved that Kyra's safety was being taken seriously, he remained vigilant, knowing that powerful figures like Farron would not easily be deterred. One afternoon, Nolan was called into the director's office. She met him with a grave expression. "Nolan, there's been a development. The Galactic Council has taken an interest in Kyra, and they've requested to see the Queen Beast's temperament firsthand. They want to determine if her newfound trust poses a threat or if it's truly a change in behavior." Nolan felt a surge of protectiveness. "What exactly are they planning?" he asked. "They want a live demonstration of her response to grooming and handling," the director replied. "They've heard of your work with her and they want you to showcase it with all of them watching." The day of the demonstration arrived, and the menagerie's main arena was packed with high-ranking officials, members of the Galactic Council, and even some media representatives. At the center of the arena stood Kyra, regal and imposing, her scales gleaming from the care Nolan had given her. She looked around with a watchful, alert gaze, her body poised with both strength and calm. Nolan stepped into the enclosure, feeling the intensity of 100 eyes on him. He focused on Kyra, pushing aside his nerves, and approached her with the same steady confidence he'd shown every day. "Hello, Kyra," he murmured, reaching out to place a gentle hand on her side. She responded with a low, soothing rumbled sound, lowering her head to allow him to begin grooming her in front of the audience. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Nolan worked, brushing her scales, applying the salve to any lingering infection spots, and even inspecting her powerful claws. Kyra remained calm and trusting, allowing Nolan to handle her without the slightest hint of aggression. At one point, she nuzzled his shoulder with surprising gentleness, a gesture that drew gasps from the crowd. When Nolan finished, He took a step back and Kyra settled beside him, her gaze calm but protective. The demonstration left no doubt in the minds of the council members and spectators. This was no longer a creature of wrath and rage. Kyra had found a bond with a human, and it was that trust that defined her strength. After the demonstration, the Galactic Council acknowledged the success of Nolan's work with Kyra, praising his humane approach and the unprecedented bond they had formed. The council members, visibly moved by what they had witnessed, unanimously decided to officially recognize Kyra not as a threat, but as a symbol of resilience and loyalty. Lord Farron, however, was less impressed. He stood at the back of the council chamber, his face shadowed with disdain, but his influence had been eclipsed by the display of trust between Kyra and Nolan. The menagerie's director then approached Farron with a resolute expression, informing him that his services would no longer be required. For the first time, Nolan felt that Syrah was truly safe. In recognition of his dedication, the menagerie appointed Nolan as the official guardian of the Queen Beast, a title reserved for those entrusted with the care of legendary creatures. Kyra's enclosure was transformed into a sanctuary, a place where she could roam freely, protected by the bond she had formed with the one person she trusted most. News of the bond between Nolan and Kyra spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring discussions about humane treatment and mutual respect for all creatures, no matter their nature. Visitors traveled from distant planets to witness the unique connection between the human Zookeeper and the Queen Beast, marveling at how the once feared creature now greeted Nolan with a gentle rumbled affection. In the following months, Nolan and Kyra became ambassadors for ethical care, traveling to other worlds to share their story and promote better treatment for all beings. Together, they advocated for the understanding that strength didn't lie in domination, but in connection and trust. One evening, as they returned to their quiet sanctuary in the menagerie, Nolan sat beside Syrah, watching the stars glimmer beyond the enclosure's glass ceiling. Syrah lay her massive head beside him, a protective presence that radiated warmth and peace. "You know, Kyra," Nolan murmured, resting a hand on her scales, "we've done something incredible here. We've changed more than just minds, we've changed hearts." Kyra let out a soft, contented rumbled sound, and Nolan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Together, they had transformed fear into friendship, forging a bond that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.